Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Road from The Straight, brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis and Darley. Today, Everest hype hits overdrive. Does carrying rising hits town? What does SEN's acquisition of TABtouch Radio tell us about the media landscape? More updates from the ATC. Ridgmont in a strategy change. Frees up sales on the Gold Coast. And what does the Four Corners investigation tell us about the wagering industry? Tim, welcome aboard from the sunny Gold Coast. Obviously, plenty going on up there. We'll have a chat about that in a minute. But first of all, let's talk about the hype and the drama around the Everest lead up. It's been a very interesting, I guess, week of Everest news, highlighted by the much debated. I mean, let's face it, it's a 1,000-meter trial. There's probably been such a high profile trial and discussed trial. I mean, this horse, Carrying Rising, he has made the Everest this year. It'll be a very different race without his presence, wouldn't it, Tim?
For sure, and that was, it was a huge crowd at Randwick. I wasn't there, but, watching on Sky, you could see how much interest it generated, and everyone had an opinion on how he trialled. I'm not going to say one way or the other. I'm no expert in Carrying Rising, but what I have been told by trainers is they're a tool. They're not, you don't want to run your race in the trials or in the, the lead up in a track gallop. So, I wouldn't be jumping off and, for those that have taken the short odds. So, yeah, I think it's great for, dare I say it, the narrative and discussion, and that's what Peter V'landys sort of wanted. It does create stories and, the slots and things like that for the past week.
Yeah, it certainly has, and the slots have created plenty of interest. We've had Godolphin lock in their run attempted, Tim, and also we've had Private Harry ruled out. We've got a few others sort of ruled in. We've probably got one left, which is Yulong's initial slot. And Yulong, I think, from memory, were the first one to lock in Private Harry way back in March. And now we're, 9 days out from the race, and we still don't have a runner for them. But it'd be interesting to see how some of that plays out. And I think probably in terms of the slot holder process, it's as has been the case more and more in the last few years, it seems to be a lot of moving and shaking in the last couple of weeks before the race.
What was intriguing about that is obviously Inglis had Skybird, she pulled up lame from the Manikato, so they were forced to change tack and locked in Magic Time, a Yulong-owned mare. There was doubts over Private Harry, so it was a bit surprising that Yulong didn't just hold fire and see how he went in the Premiere, but they, already got Angel Capital in there through James Harron Bloodstock, their syndicate. Yeah, and then Magic Time with Inglis, and now they're sort of left holding the baby. The Yulong team, or Jun, the Zhang's up here at the Gold Coast, so I'm sure, and Sam Fairgrave, there's a few discussions. I think Mr. Zhang's still in China at the moment. I'm not sure whether he's coming out next week for the English sales and the Everest. He might be in China watching from afar with 3 runners.
Yeah, it will be interesting. I mean, we spoke about this before. The reality is that those Yulong green colours are becoming very dominant in Australian racing, and highly likely we'll see them on 3 sets of horses. Likely we'll see them on 3 sets of horses next week, although if one of them is Charmstones, I'm assuming she might stick with the colours that she's got. So, but no certainties at this stage about what that other one might look like, and by the time we get published, it may have been decided. So, apologies if we're behind the ball. We're recording this on Thursday morning. As things stand at the moment, we've got 11 of the 12 Everest runners are locked in. I wanted to touch too, Tim, on a story coming out yesterday. SEN's acquisition of TABtouch Radio, which is WA's racing radio assets and station effectively. This comes off the back of SEN's acquisition of RSN in Victoria. It probably speaks to a more broader shuffle around racing media assets. Now, radio people might consider to be a legacy asset in a broader space, but there's still significant value in this radio space, and obviously SEN have seen the value of that, and Craig Hutchison and the team are working very hard to sort of aggregate a strong presence in that area.
And absolutely, and they, a national focus. Obviously, Gareth Hall sort of hosts their morning racing radio show, Giddy Up, at the moment. And the broader reach it can get provides value to advertisers, I guess, and to a national audience. I guess the only sort of SEN does have Queensland stations, I think, but just sort of New South Wales and Queensland, how he gets broad reach. I mean, those 2 states will be interesting. Obviously, Sky or Tabcorp and Sky wrote the 2 radio stations in Queensland and New South Wales, whether they look to offload that. It is, to me, it seems like a valuable asset, along with Sky sort of locking out their corporate bookmaker competitors. So, whereas SEN and Craig Hutchison have sort of seen the value in that and getting all the other corporates on side and advertising in 365 and Ladbrokes and whoever else.
Yeah. And what is interesting about TABtouch, of course, is that they're aligned close to the WA tab over there, which, obviously would make sense that might be an alignment there, but it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. And what is also interesting is you mentioned there about Sky, from a broadcast perspective, in terms of race broadcasting, digital, including video race broadcasting, I suppose. The move yesterday, or the announcement yesterday, that betr now will have vision of Sky Racing vision on their site. So Sky Racing also, already appears on Sportsbet, as we've known. That sort of deal was done sort of around about just pre-COVID time. There's a few sort of basically parlayed off a deal with CrownBet initially and worked out. But it does seem to me that Tab are much more happier to be, rather than be a front-of-face media brand, to use that Sky Media brand to actually become a provider for the other people in the industry, and as opposed to becoming like the brand itself. So wouldn't completely surprise at some stage in the near future that maybe those radio assets come up for a discussion. And as we know, Craig Hutchison and SEN are very ambitious in their plans, and they're able to get that strength and that monopoly or that national sort of presence, I suppose, or that national hold through those racing radio stations. It would make sense from that perspective. So it wouldn't be completely surprised with thinking next year going, oh, by the way, Tab have decided to put their radio assets up for bid. So anyway, interesting times in that regard. I wanted to also touch on, Tim, I'm sure we've covered a lot of, but the ATC show cause notice, which has been pushed back for a couple of weeks, as we mentioned last week. But what is interesting about this is your story earlier this week, talking about the precedent that's against the ATC. I mean, you dug in and found 4 clubs. I think, was it 4 clubs or 3 clubs?
Yeah, four clubs. So Hawkesbury, Queanbeyan, Tamworth and Walleye, over the last sort of 12 years have been asked to show cause, and they're all put into administration. And it depends who you talk to about that, whether they should have or shouldn't have. I don't want to disparage Tamworth, but people tell me that they probably, they had a lot of issues and probably should have been put into administration. And whereas, now, all those clubs, bar Hawkesbury, are out of administration, and Hawkesbury showed a profit last year, so they're probably close to coming out of administration. And there is a board in place at Hawkesbury still. So, but it just shows that, I guess the ATC directors and those people behind them putting their case forward will have to show why they're different to those other clubs, I guess, and why they are financially stable and can continue to trade.
Yeah. It is interesting the way that sort of it played out. I think what was probably reading that article, the Hawkesbury situation, whereby there's still a board in place, a 3-person board in place, as well as Jo Moore, the administrator, and she's been overseeing things since about 2023. The initial administration, I think, was 2021, I think, Tim, from memory, when it went into that state. And so what was interesting is that there is a different model there, whereby ATC could effectively function, but with a Racing New South Wales representative or appointed administrator, actually running the place. And look, we don't know how this one's going to end, but that would seem the model that Racing New South Wales, should they decide that that's something that they need to do, that would probably be the model they would proceed with. But interesting times with the ATC. It'll be a big story when it does occur, probably in the couple of weeks after the Everest. So we'll keep following that one. Just before we wrap up in the racing space, I did want to reflect on a couple of losses in the racing media landscape this week. Warren Huntly passed away over the weekend, as did Hilton Donaldson. Warren was a form analyst and media personality, mainly in Victoria, was on racing.com, RSN, was on Sky Racing Radio as well. I knew Warren back when I was working the racing.com days, but got to know him quite well. He's a gentleman, of terrific, passionate racing person, and a very sad loss, unfortunately. And Hilton Donaldson was someone that people remembered as a racing commentator. He's probably stopped commentating now about a decade ago, Tim, but old school, I suppose, colourful character racing commentator, was able to bring great life to it. And I think, like racing of all sports, they're very connected with the people that have been in the sport. And that's the one thing that you realise, like the reaction, even in terms of social media reaction, but also even just in terms of the amount of people looking at stories about these people that we write on our sites, shows you that, people do hold that. And someone mentioned to me the other day that we don't know these people necessarily, but there is a great connection to these people, because you spend a lot of time, whether it's listening to people commentate races or someone doing form analysis or whatever else, you feel like you know these people. And so there's a great connection around that. So ballet to those two gentlemen. And it's a sad time in the racing industry. We lose people, and to lose people of significant prominence.
I didn't know Warren as well as you, Bren, or a lot of other people, but I did get to know him in the early 2000s, enjoyed couple of long lunches with Warren and a few other colleagues, well, winning post days way back then. So, great person, and, like everyone, a lot of people in the game, incredibly passionate about it, and that's why he made it his career, and, did a very good job, and, highly respected, and sort of knew his place, and, very good form analyst and jockey manager and all sorts of things, and obviously track work judge.
The following segment is brought to you by Darley. We've talked about emerging stallions. Now let me throw another one into the mix. Native Trail. Breeders couldn't stop calling him the best-looking stallion on Darley's roster. That's on top of being a champion 2-year-old and a classic winner at 3. The scary part? His foals are just as sharp-looking as he is. On too darn hot all over again, but with his own twist. Native Trail has the looks, the race record, and now the foals to back it up. He's staring you right in the face. Native Trail, standing at Darley Calvin's side for $27,500, including GST. On to breeding on bloodstock now, Tim, and just to explain to the listeners out there, we're going to cut this one up a little bit because we're recording most of this podcast before the Breeze Up sale, the horse and training sale today at Magic Millions, but we're going to insert an interview with Barry Bowditch, hopefully, if Barry wants to speak to us, after the sale's complete. So what we'll do is we'll do a little segment now. We'll put a bit of a review for Tim and I about the sale, and then some comments from Barry after that. So just to explain the format for everybody, but what we do want to get into is still plenty of news in the breeding and bloodstock space. Ridgmont was the news this week, Tim, was a story that came to us, I think, late Tuesday, that the Cunningham family were set to sell up the farm there and will still be heavily involved in racing and breeding, moving most of their breeding stock to Newgate, some to Yarraman Park, but basically looking to offload the farm there in the Hunter Valley, which is a significant, I guess, change in strategy for them. You spoke to Mitch quite extensively on Tuesday. It's obviously an emotional time to have that strategy change, but I mean, I guess relatively new entrance into the market to 2020, 2021. They've sort of built up their presence quite a lot, but I mean, we do often see these changes in strategy in Ridgemont's case. It's probably a significant one, Tim, because they had been a major new player, especially in that, breeding and consigning yearlings and things like that.
Sure, and Mitch wanted to emphasise, and we're grateful that he came to us about the story, that they're not exiting the industry. They're just, change the strategy, selling the farm, and as we all running a farm is hugely capital intensive, labour intensive, and getting staff. And they had a lot of good staff there. At about 15 will unfortunately be looking for work elsewhere, and I'm sure they'll be snapped up. But they just changed the strategy and sort of just redirecting that capital that does involve running a farm. It is hugely expensive, and so they just decided this is the way to go, and they've had a lot of success with obviously Storm Boy, Steffi Magnetica, but they'll be chasing more success. They've got horses in Ireland in training with Joseph O'Brien, so they're not going anywhere, which is important for the industry. But I guess going forward, more interesting is who is going to buy this Ridgmont farm. It does, you can speculate about how much a farm like that would be worth. I'm saying, probably you'd probably want at least 15 million, Bren, I reckon, if you wanted to buy it. But there's other farms for sale, privately if you wanted to. Sedgemoor, as we know, has been on the market. So who is going to buy a farm like that? Yulong is the obvious one. Whether eventually they will have a presence in the Hunter, no doubt. It's just when and what farm and for how much and things like that. So there's already been speculation about other people showing interest, but again, it's a huge investment and commitment, many years in the making. So watch this space, I'd suggest.
Yeah, and just a more general comment, and this doesn't necessarily, is not necessarily a reflection of the Ridgmont situation or the Cunningham family situation, but the challenge of running mare-only farms from a cost perspective, Tim, and so it's a different sort of model. If you're running a stallion farm, then you're sort of getting the upside, and obviously if you've got your stallions and you've got your own mares, and that sort of makes sense. It is hard to, from a resource factor, and probably just in terms of just the way, developing out and scaling a farm, running a mares only farm, particularly if you only have a lot of your own mares, and that it's an expensive exercise.
For sure, and there's a lot of staff involved in running a farm like that, and then yearling preparation, staff coming in for those preps, and then going trying to find them, and then it's expensive to get to the Gold Coasts and Melbournes and wherever else you're selling stock. So a lot of staff away from the farm a lot of the time. Just again, it takes up a lot of capital, a lot of time, but at the same time, Ridgmont's case, it is a turnkey investment. If for someone who wanted to walk in, there is outside support there. It's not only Ridgmont owned mares on the property. So there is a going concern there if someone wanted to step in and buy it for however much. As I said, I'd speculate 15 million plus, but I could be out significantly in that price. So don't hold me to it.
And Tim, we're at the end of a long day there up on the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast horses and training sale now completed. Interesting day of trade, just some top line stats here. 92 lots sold of the 187 catalogued, average of 71,000 or 71,900. Top price of $550,000 from an I'm Invincible colt. Gross was 6.6 million, probably a clearance rate a bit lower than they would have expected at 66%. But it seemed like they got through the sale. It wasn't a booming sale per se, Tim, but it was probably enough positive in it for Magic Millions and for the buyers.
It was a tough start, and that's, a lot of sales start slowly, particularly 2-year-old sales, and it's first one for the season or the year. But it did build up throughout the day, which is just how the catalogue fell a little bit too with some of the better horses later in the day. I think it provides them a little bit of momentum. It's probably coming off a low base. They have their 2-year-old sales, by their own admission, probably haven't been up to as good as they would have liked over the last few years, and there's reasons for that. But I think there was enough momentum there today. If they can get more Hong Kong buyers, they bought at least 10 horses were bought by Hong Kong, and Michael Chang paid $320,000 for a Pirata. And so there was some nice horses here. The horses that, like we say at every sale, every horse that vetted well, breezed well, nice type or a good conformation, sold very well. But there's just no room for error or compromise. If it didn't vet well, scopes even, grade 3 and above are sort of probably out of the window and probably already scratched in a lot of ways. But there's something to work with for Magic Millions, and as Barry says, they're committed to the format. So they've got some work to do, and they can build on it hopefully, and good competition having 3 players in the market.
Yeah, and the gross was about $1 million less than last year, but that's at this point. They'll probably get some business done over the next couple of years. Average was down by about 4,000 on last year. Medium price was also down slightly as well. So, it probably, as you said, there's probably some question marks about where exactly the market is. It's probably sluggish to start with, getting all those, particularly Asian buyers, the guys from Hong Kong down. A little bit difficult with the timing, but they was probably certainly happy enough with the top end and the sort of way things played out, Tim.
The bottom end of, obviously there's no Singapore or Macau now, but Malaysia was reasonably strong late. NZB have got a big race in Malaysia this weekend, which made it difficult for some trainers to get down, or they chose not to. Some still participated. Thailand bought a couple, the Philippines, sort of the David Chester area, and China was very strong with 13 horses bought by Amy Feng. So there is green shoots, I'd say, without overstating it. But let's listen to Barry, and he has his view. Barry, it's 2-year-old sales are hard to judge at the best of times, especially just the range of horses and prices and buys and things like that. How would you assess today's sale for Magic Millions?
Yeah, I was satisfied with today. I think for the right horse that walked in the ring, that was, that breezed well, that looked the part, that vetted the part, there was good interest. Obviously I think we sold more horses for 6 figures than we did last year. The average is comparable to last year. The clearance rate's comparable. And the gross is slightly down. So all in all, I'm satisfied with today, and feel that on a whole there was a good cross section of buyers. I think obviously the locals and the interstaters played their part. Queensland was very good as it should be, and I thought whether it be we had an increased spend, an increased number of horses sold to Hong Kong. We had, a good number sold to China, Malaysia, Philippines, and other jurisdictions of Asia. So all in all, I'm pleased with the result, and I think it gives us impetus to go out there and find better product for next year.
Is that what it's about? Trying to get the vendor's confidence to reinvest and find the right horses to get to the more Hong Kong buyers here. Michael Chang spent a bit. I think it was 320 on a Pirata, and he's got a nice one in the stable, he was telling me. So, if that momentum continues, they'll keep coming back.
Exactly. I think it's about having the right horses and having the trust and giving them a good experience while they're here. So, I think for the buyers that were here, and you always want to get more from all these jurisdictions and what than what you're having in the ground. That's the mandate we have, and I feel as if with better product, you can continue to grow this market. Obviously, the 2-year-old market is viable in this part of the world. It's strengthening year on year, and we're hungry to ensure we've got a good footprint on it.
What was interesting was Amy Feng, your China representative, bought 10, I believe, and most, if not all, are going back to China. Mr. Zhang, as we wrote about on the Straight a week or two ago, is investing in sort of $2 million race next year so a lot of different Chinese owners in Hong Kong and are getting behind that race and clearly spending a lot of money, $360,000 on a schnitzel out of Diadem, a written tycoon for $300. So they want to have a nice horse to win it.
Yeah, Amy's fantastic. She's bought 13 horses at the sale for $107,000. So spent $1.4 million. But as you say, second top price of $360. It's great to see China really engaging here in Australia and having, a lot more faces come down. And I think that's off the back of, obviously, Mr. Zhang and Yulong's investment in this country and what they're doing in China and giving them confidence, in the Australian product, which is great to see. But, in fairness to, Amy, David Chester and the our international team, they've done a good job recruiting a solid group of buyers for the sale.
And you're definitely committed to this format going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in this, and we press upon our vendors that we've got now. We would like to grow and give confidence to new players to come in and participate in this market from a selling perspective, and we want to continue to drive forward with it. Obviously, Jerry's got a big footprint in this sale. He's passionate about it, and we feel as if we're in a good place to continue to grow this sale.
And of course, sales not just happening here in Australia, but overseas as well. So Tattersalls October yielding sale at the moment in the UK, Newmarket, and we've seen Ridgmont and Godolphin going at it head to head. They pretty much dominated that sale over there, spending big money. We're talking, I think Ridgmont, I think if my stats are correct, and I'll just have to triple check them here, he has spent a significant amount of money. It's in the realm of sort of $22 million Australian dollars in the first 2 days over there, and Godolphin are not that far behind him. The top end of that market seems extremely strong, and Ammo Racing's entry into that market has certainly changed things up, hasn't it, Tim?
Push Coolmore. We've seen it, examples of this in Australia with Yulong, obviously, and particularly Coolmore going head to head, and there is a bit of ego about that. Do you stop at, I think, top, 3.6 or 3.7 million guineas, which is, a significant, huge amount of money. So,
and just after I about the guineas, roughly are about half of about twice the Australian dollar. So, you probably got to multiply that out, maybe a bit more, 10% on top of that. So it's a lot of money.
For sure. And so, those big players, it's about, for Kia's organisation and Ammo Racing, maybe it doesn't need to make financial sense. It's about wanting to be there on the big days and having Group 1 winners at the big carnivals, the Goodwoods and Royal Ascots and all over, the Northern Hemisphere. It'd be great if Ammo wanted to start investing in Australia, but there's been no sign of that as yet or any interest. But you never know, as they get bigger and bigger, that maybe they do have to stretch or they do decide to sort of take on a more global approach. But at the moment, those big guys, it's forcing the Coolmores to go higher, and, Sheikh Mohammed and Godolphin seem to be, they do love that European racing and still going hard at the top end there.
Yeah, it's just interesting to see too that one of the ones they bought on the second day of the sale, bred by the Kamani family, Luca and Sarah Kamani, a $2.2 million Frankel colt. The other bidder was Mitsu Nakashita, who we know well from bidding on the Gold Coast, Tim, earlier this year, and buying the Home Affairs filly out of... Yeah. Thank you. Yes. For 3 point. What was the amount?
3.2 million there late on the the last day.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting that there's some of these global names go around the world and are trying to pick out horses, around the world. So it's the nature of global bloodstock these days. These names, and it said, it wouldn't completely surprise me at some stage if Ammo Racing turns up, because if you're getting John Stewart's and you're getting Coolmores, and what will be interesting too is Godolphin spending a lot of money at the moment over there. Andy Mackey's probably wasn't effusive when we spoke to him about their involvement in the market in Australia coming forward. They sort of have to make it work for themselves, but if they've got the right horses, they'll find it. But clearly that globally, Godolphin's purses are very much still open. So it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think there'll be plenty of intrigue about what happens when you turn up back on the Gold Coast team in January. And the following segment is brought to you by Inglis. The strongest collection of sire power ever assembled for an Australian 2-year-old sale will be offered at the Inglis Ready to Race sale on Thursday, October 16th. Catalogue of 222 lots has been finalised with the auction. It's now available on the Inglis website. The Inglis Ready to Race sale is easily the best and most progressive 2-year-old sale in the country. It has provided almost 800 individual graduates since 2016 at an average earning per runner of over $111,000, some 35% higher than its nearest rival. It also has the highest winners to runners ratio of any Southern Hemisphere breeze-up sale. And you can get all the details of all the latest times and breeze-up details and other data. It's now available at inglis.com.au. Check out the catalogue today. Finally, in wagering, Tim. Interesting, you and I both watched the Four Corners special or Four Corners episode on Monday around about the wagering industry and I guess some of the question marks about the way that industry is being regulated. Interesting your take on it from your perspective, Tim. Did you feel like, I guess, there was plenty of things sort of put up there, but did you feel that there was anything significantly enough new to concern the broader wagering industry about the way it's regulated?
Look, I'll say I'm not condoning what, some of those examples, and for the people that, invest money and lost money through, problem gamblers and the problem gamblers themselves, there is avenues, and there should be avenues for them to, try and crack down on that and, minimize the problem gamblers, I guess, or help them as much as possible. So I'm not condoning that, but I didn't think the program was as damning that as it could have been, or possibly we're expecting in the lead-in. What it does show, I guess, is the regulation in their NT. They probably just need more resources and people to be able to oversee, given the rise of the industry there, the number of bookmakers. Previously there was probably a handful, 5 or 6, and now there's, every second corporate bookmakers signs up there, and there is talk that they do want to up the tax regime up there, and perhaps that extra revenue will go towards trying to regulate the industry. But as I said, on face value, I didn't think it was as damning as it could have been, and perhaps it is such a broad issue and industry that trying to get all that into a 35-minute episode is quite difficult.
Yeah, and I think like the fundamental two things are a regulation and whether there's a need for a national regulator, which was called upon by the Win Samuel Lismore report a couple of years ago. What does a national regulator look like? Do we have state-based regulators? And the other thing was around consumer protection and the broader protection, and whether bookmakers should be, I guess, liable for losses basically people that may take money from elsewhere and illegally take money from elsewhere and then utilize that in order to bet in a problematic way, whether bookmakers should be responsible for whether to be. So there's all sort of familiar faces there. Yeah, Andrew Wilkie's description, the independent MP's description of it as a wild west of Australian business. Look, I think to a certain extent there'll be a little bit that rings true about that regulatory-wise, that there does need to be a bit more. I think your mention of the explosion of the number of bookmakers, I think that there's a lot of frustration about that within the broader wagering industry, that the number of bookmakers has meant that there was a case we wrote up yesterday with BetRight being fined for something that happened in 2021. That's 4 years ago. That's about 4 publications ago for me, Tim. You could go back through how long it's taken them to get things. I mean, and to be fair to the Northern Territory, now called the Racing and Wagering Commission, I think they have had a change in their structure since then, and the amount they can fine has gone up. They can only do what they can do. I do think, and I've mentioned this before, and I think I put in my newsletter last week, that if you're a big enough industry, and the wagering industry is a big industry, we're talking billions of dollars being turned over and generated with this industry, you have to expect media scrutiny. It's part of what you do. Now, whether you believe that media scrutiny is fair or balanced, you can make up your own mind. But running away from cameras or trying to jump in a car, if you're going to jump in a car, make sure it can start up quick enough and you don't have to stall it a couple of times. I think for old Alistair Shields probably would prefer he took the other car to work that day. But it's important that you come across as, open and not coming across, because perception's everything, and particularly in politics. And there is plenty of people, so David Pocock was front and centre of that, and there were other parliamentary people who were involved in politicians who are involved in that broadcast. And I think there's obviously a political value to them, and they've got a political opportunity, and that's fine. They can pursue that as much as they want. But wagering needs to be making sure, the wagering industry needs to make sure that's transparent on this stuff, and that if there is a failure or there is an issue, that they're trying to help find a solution around this stuff. Yeah, it's an interesting challenge for the wagering industry moving forward. There's obviously a strong political movement. The advertising stuff is one aspect that probably wasn't as big a part of it as, obviously they brought in Usman Khawaja as a figure there to talk about that. I'm not too sure that meant much to the argument of the story. But for me, I think, it's only going to become more scrutiny. And we expect probably the next few months that the federal government's going to make their decisions on what that advertising structure will look like. And that'll shape the industry going forward. So, I don't think this will be the first story on that. That would be my thoughts. So,
I just want to add, Bren, that I did think Aussie Khawaja was probably a little bit naive, where he said in that program that Cricket Australia or the sport isn't that reliant on gambling revenue, and maybe directly they're not, but certainly in TV rights, a big part of that for Fox Cricket and Channel 7 is the return they can get through gambling advertising. So I think a little bit naive, and he is close to retirement, so probably won't affect him. But if his cricketing colleagues going through the ranks, might feel the pinch if the broadcast rights aren't worth as much. And it was just, to me, a little bit naive on that front.
Yeah, and not getting too pointed on this, but cricket is the sport which has had the most significant global scandal around gambling, around illegal gambling, which for me was an interesting one. The concept that that what was raised was this concept that if you crack down in one area, people will go to unregulated operators, and the response was, oh no, that doesn't happen. And they went to the guy in, I think it was Denmark, and he said, oh, it's not an issue here. ACMA, who's a government-based regulator, has said illegal gambling in Australia or unregulated gambling in Australia is a $2 billion plus issue. So it's not a small issue. And so to pretend to say, oh, well, people don't go to, they do. Like we know, Tim, we know that how easy it is for people to set up an account with these other providers. And so from my perspective, I think that, it is a significant issue. You can't pretend that you're operating in a vacuum. If you over-regulate in one area, particularly from consumer point of view, the consumers will turn their energy somewhere else. And within Australia, the way that the law is structured, there's nothing, an Australian who bets on an overseas unregulated operator is not breaking the law. The operator's breaking the law, but not the consumer. And so people will find their ways, and technology disrupts. We've seen this through this surge in crypto casinos. We don't know what that market looks like. There's never been a proper study, and it's very difficult to study what that market looks like. But I think to sit there and say, oh, no, if we regulate the market here, then no one will go overseas. Like, who knows, how many other issues there are with people who are in positions of financial influence, losing money, offshore that we never know about. Yeah, as said, the public cases are obviously around about the local bookies, and their behaviour needs to be closely scrutinised. I don't have a problem with that. But to pretend that overseas stuff is not an issue is, for me, a little bit disingenuous. But anyway, it's an interesting issue and a complex issue as well. A couple other small points on the wagering space. I mentioned the betr rights, I guess, getting the Sky Racing rights, which is interesting. betr also shook up their board this week. Alexi Baker's joined the board. PointsBet have also announced their board, which is dominated by Mixie. Obviously, a story we covered a lot, but it's interesting, sort of like the practicality of Mixie taking effective control of that company with 66% of shares has now sort of evolved from there as well. And there's a few other bits and pieces of stories around the wagering landscape at the moment. So plenty to talk about in that space. So we're also coming into spring racing season. It's a very busy time of year for the bookmakers anyway. Yeah, and kind of like the peak time of season as well. And I guess, there was a bit of commentary elsewhere that, typical ABC, they put a program up, during spring racing carnival. How predictable is this? Of course they're going to do that. That's where people are most interested in wagering. Like, if we're running a story, Tim, we've got to run it according to the best timing and the best effect. We're not going to run a story about issues with, if there was a story about issues with the Melbourne Cup or the VRC, we're not going to bury it in June. We're going to put it the week before the Melbourne Cup because it's a big story and it's important you get prominence. It's called journalism. That's why you do it. You put the story where it gets the most value. So I think those criticisms are a bit wide of the mark as well. But anyway, that's my little dig elsewhere. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis Daily. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to our podcast, and be sure to subscribe. Send us an email, editor@thestraight.com.au. We had a couple of people sending in emails this week, including esteemed media colleague Sam Doran. Thanks for your positive feedback, Sam. Always nice to get your positive feedback on our podcast. Yep, all the best for the week, and we'll talk to you again next week.